Hi, hello, it's Prachi, and today I want to talk to you guys about a reading challenge that I set for myself in 2021 that I'm hoping to finish in 2023. The challenge consists of 5 prompts that I made up, and it pits together 2 literary giants of the back half of the 1800s. 2 white male literary giants at the very least, Charles Dickens and Leo Tolstoy. A basic outline of this video is I'm going to talk about what inspired me to do this challenge, then I'm going to go over the 5 different prompts that I've set up, as well as the books that I own. I have them all set aside over here that I'm going to use to fulfill the prompts. I figured I would just, I would like put the challenge out there into the ether. If people want to join me, they can join me. If people just want to see me like struggle bus with some really thick books over the next year, that's also totally fine. You are under no obligation to read or join me. Please feel free to use the timestamps or chapters to skip around this video as you wish. But without any further ado, let's get it. So first I want to talk a little bit about what inspired this challenge, because prior to taking it on, I had literally never read anything by either Charles Dickens or Leo Tolstoy. But in June-July of last year, Marvel and Disney Plus put out Loki, featuring Tom Hiddleston. I watched that entire show. I was watching like clips of it on YouTube at the same time that I was also watching a lot of literary content. And I guess the YouTube algorithm was like, so you like Loki and you like literary stuff, here is like a 90-minute video featuring Tom Hiddleston in the thumbnail. I'm gonna link that video up in the cards in case anyone's interested in watching it and hasn't seen it yet. But it's basically like an hour-long Intelligence Squared debate featuring 2 literary academics, one of whom is Team Dickens, the other of whom is Team Tolstoy, and they're basically arguing for who is the better literary giant of the back half of the 19th century. And in addition to their sort of literary debate, they hired a bunch of different actors, Tom Hiddleston included, that's why he's in the thumbnail, to act out and dramatically read out excerpts of Dickens and Tolstoy's books. Shout out the YouTube algorithm for knowing like exactly what the hell I wanted to watch, because I watched that video from start to finish. And not only did I watch that video from start to finish, I actually went back and I rewatched it at normal speed instead of 2 times speed, which for me, watching a spoken YouTube video at 1 times the speed instead of speeding it up, it's honestly like one of the highest honors that I can give. I was so like fired up with enthusiasm and motivation that I actually sat down, came up with like 5 little prompts for myself, decided that I was going to read 1 book by Dickens and 1 book by Tolstoy to fulfill each of the prompts. And at the end of having read 5 books by each author, 10 books total, I was going to decide which author I personally liked the best. I went on the Storygraph, I created a little reading challenge, I like wrote up the little prompts. I'm gonna leave a link to the reading challenge on Storygraph down below in case any of you would like to join. And funnily enough, like 6 random strangers decided that they were going to join me on the challenge. I was really gung-ho about it, and for like the last year and a half, I've been thinking that this was like some wholly original idea that I came up with. Only to discover yesterday, in anticipation of filming this video, I was like conducting a bunch of research, and I realized that there are 2 YouTubers out there who, like me, saw that Dickens versus Tolstoy debate, and they are like, I believe, literature students, and they have been, for like ages now, been doing a Dickens versus Tolstoy project where they try to read both authors' full bibliographies. Now, I salute these 2 ladies. Their project is clearly one of a much larger and longer scale. I'm just trying to read 5 books by each author to fulfill these like made up prompts that I came up with. I sat down and I watched like the introductory video for their challenges yesterday. I haven't watched any of their actual like review debate videos because I don't want their takes to sort of influence what I think of the books. So I kind of want to make sure that I am like forming my own ideas and thoughts and opinions on these books without being swayed by any external parties. If you are already following that challenge, or you're avid watchers of, I believe their names are Carolyn Marie and Emmy, I would hope that my videos and my takes on Dickens versus Tolstoy would also be useful and illustrative because we're all different people. We are all going to have different life experiences that kind of like shape our perspectives of the books. And I think we're all going to have really different like thoughts and feelings and even topics that kind of like jump out at us based off of, you know, our own life experience, right? So for example, I think both Carolyn Marie and Emmy both studied literature in university. The last literature class I took was in high school, right? I studied engineering and then international relations and Latin American studies. So I'm actually really excited to sort of watch their discussions because I'm sure they're going to have much more interesting things to say about like the literary aspects of it all. On the flip side, while all three of us are women, I'm a queer person of color who literally comes from some of the countries that Charles Dickens speaks very poorly of in his novels. So basically what I'm trying to say is I think we're all probably different enough as people that we're all going to have really different takes on the novels and different like things that we notice and pull out and care about. But anyway, I have prattled on long enough for this. The point is there is enough space for like everyone's hot takes on Dickens and Tolstoy in the world. I'm really excited to see what they think. I hope that you will like also give me the space if you are like a fan of those two amazing ladies who are like tackling a much more ambitious version of this project on. I hope you'll also give me some space and grace to like air my own shit. So yeah, without any further ado, I'm gonna open up the story graph so that I can kind of tell you like exactly what it is I called the different prompts that I wrote. So prompt 1 for my version of the Dickens versus Tolstoy challenge is called The Hidden Gem. And it's basically to read a lesser known work by Dickens and then a lesser known work by Tolstoy. Essentially, there are, you know, some texts where the moment that you say Charles Dickens, these are the texts that come to mind. Like everybody thinks of The Christmas Carol, Great Expectations, David Copperfield, Oliver Twist. Similarly, when you say Leo Tolstoy, everyone always thinks of War and Peace and Anna Karenina. So the first prompt is kind of to go off the beaten path a little and to find a lesser known work from each of the two authors and read them to see if it's a hidden gem or if it was rightfully kind of like forgotten by history and by larger society. So for Dickens's hidden gem, I chose the book Dombey and Son. I ended up choosing it because I believe it's Katie at Books and Things. She ranks Dombey and Son really, really highly in Charles Dickens's discography. Discography? He's not a musician. Bibliography. I always use discography for everything and I'm like, that is not the appropriate term. There's like filmography, bibliography, there's all these other terms and I'm constantly just like discography as if everyone's just dropping fire mixtapes. Anyway, she ranked it really highly. I think it was in her like top 3 or definitely in her top 5 and I had literally never heard of this book. And so galvanized by her high ranking of this book, I picked it up last summer, in summer 2021, and I actually read it from start to finish, like cover to cover. And I talked really briefly about this in the video that I made last year where I was reviewing every single book that I read in 2021, but I am going to film a dedicated video for Dombey and Son. I'm going to film a dedicated video literally for every single one of the 10 books that I read because I'm reading these books really carefully. I'm sort of like marking up the text and annotating it. I'm thinking a lot about which elements of the text I like and I don't like. I'm trying to basically be like a little bit more of a literary person. You'll definitely hear my like detailed thoughts about this book really, really soon, but I want to make it clear that Dickens has like a huge bibliography. If you want to join me on this challenge, like you don't have to read Dombey and Son. You can read any one of his like books that aren't like super duper famous and fulfill the challenge. Basically just like don't read A Christmas Carol, Great Expectations, or David Copperfield. So my personal choice for Dickens's hidden gem was Dombey and Son. For Tolstoy's hidden gem, I chose Childhood, Boyhood, Youth. This is actually a trilogy, so I think it was initially published as 3 separate novels, Childhood, Boyhood, and Youth, and they represent, I believe, the first 3 novels that Tolstoy ever wrote. I deadass had like never heard of this book ever at all. The only 2 Tolstoy texts I'd ever heard of were War and Peace and Anna Karenina, so for me, literally every other thing that Tolstoy has ever written was a hidden gem. And I sort of picked this out because one of the academics in the original Dickens versus Tolstoy debate said that Childhood, Boyhood, Youth was Tolstoy's attempt to craft a story like Charles Dickens. Childhood, Boyhood, Youth is sort of a fictionalized novel version of Tolstoy's own life, much in the same way that David Copperfield is sort of like a fictionalized novel version of Charles Dickens's own life. And I'm kind of really curious to see like what Tolstoy's take on writing a Dickensian novel is. Once again, you are in no way, shape, or form obligated to read this book if you're joining me on this challenge. Literally read anything that isn't War and Peace or Anna Karenina. I would consider that to be like a lesser known classic. God, I feel like I spent a million years just talking about prompt number 1. Let me move this shit along. So I called prompt number 2 the character-driven classic. Essentially, I want you to read a book by Dickens and by Tolstoy that is centered around the journey of a single protagonist, or which has the name of a character in the title. So for Charles Dickens, you have a lot of different options. If you want to go the route of choosing a book that has a character title in the name, you have Nicholas Nickleby, David Copperfield, Oliver Twist, Barnaby Rudge, Little Dorrit. If on the other hand, you want to go the route of a book that is centered on a single character's journey, a great option, pun intended, is Great Expectations. Because Great Expectations pretty much follows the life of young Philip, or Pip, as he's affectionately known, from his boyhood well into adulthood. For Tolstoy's character-driven classic, I am reading Anna Karenina. So this book cover of Anna Karenina is not available anywhere else in the world because it is a fabric book cover that my mom and I sewed ourselves on a sewing machine last summer. Quite frankly, because the original cover for this hardbound novel was disgusting. I hated it with every fiber of my being. The edition of Anna Karenina that I will personally be choosing to read is the one translated by Larissa Volonkhonsky and Richard Pevear. I forgot to mention the translation of Childhood, Boyhood, Youth that I have. I have a translation by Judson, Rosengrant. There are a lot of different translations of Tolstoy's work out there. For Anna Karenina in particular, there are a lot of different translations. Somebody on Reddit was nice enough to post the first chapter of Anna Karenina across all these different translations, and when I read the first chapter, the tone that Pevear and Volonkhonsky set up, their word choice, the way that it kind of flowed, it gelled the best for me. My advice when you're picking a translation to read is like, don't stress too much about what's the best translation overall. Worry more about like which translation sings to you, because Anna Karenina is not a thin book, right? Like Tolstoy wrote some chonkers, and if you're gonna spend like 800 pages immersed in this language, it would be nice if you actually liked the language. If you don't want to read Anna Karenina, which I understand because again, like 800 plus pages, there are a bunch of other options for a character-driven classic from Tolstoy. Tolstoy has a couple of like short stories and shorter novels, novellas basically, that all have character names in the title. So The Death of Ivan Ilyich is one of them, Hadji Murat is another one, and I believe there's like a short story called Alyosha and the Pot. Childhood, Boyhood, Youth, which I brought up earlier, is also actually a pretty good option in terms of, you know, there's not necessarily a person's name in the title, but it pretty much just follows a single person's journey. I am an unhinged person and I'm going to read 10 books total, but if you want to fulfill more than one challenge prompt with the same book, like please feel free to do whatever you want. Like I'm not here to control your reading. Prompt number 3 is to read a serious work by each of the two authors. Now, when I say a serious work, what I basically mean is a work that functions as a critique of some aspect of society. So it could be politics, it could be religion, it could be war, it could be gender. So for example, Nicholas Nickleby critiques the sort of like boarding school system that young boys in England are often put through. Oliver Twist critiques the way that like poor children, street children, orphans are often treated. Dombey and Son, which I mentioned earlier, is essentially a critique of gender norms in Victorian society. Each of those books I would consider to be a serious work. The Dickens novel that I personally will be reading to fulfill the serious work prompt is Bleak House. I actually own 2 copies of the novel because I'm just extra as hell like that. I'm not sure which one of them I will end up reading. They're both the exact same novel with the exact same text. Bleak House is a critique of the English legal system, particularly when it comes to matters of bureaucracy and inheritance and just those sort of like glacial pace of getting anything done in the legal system. So that is what I will be reading to fulfill the prompt for Dickens. For Tolstoy, I will be reading a bunch of his short stories, because from what I'm given to understand, it was in his short stories where Tolstoy really gave sort of his most pointed critiques of society. So the sort of compilation of stories that I have here is put out by Vintage Classics. It's The Death of Ivan Ilyich and Other Stories, a new translation by Richard Pevear and Larissa Volonkhonsky. And in addition to the titular story, it also includes the Kreutzer Sonata, The Devil, and Hadji Murat. All three of those short stories and novellas are super critical of certain aspects of society. For example, Hadji Murat is very, very anti-war, and specifically of Russia's involvement in what was essentially like a colonizing and very brutal war in one of its neighboring areas. So I personally am going to read all of the short stories in here because I have this book anyway, but if you want to fulfill this prompt, you can just read like one of the short stories. The individual stories in here, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, the Kreutzer Sonata, Hadji Murat, they're all like, I believe, less than 100 pages long. Alright, moving on to prompt number 4. Prompt number 4 is the historical novel prompt. Essentially, read a piece of historical fiction written by Dickens and a piece of historical fiction written by Tolstoy. And this is now where the challenges really begin to narrow down. Because here's a fun fact. Charles Dickens has only 2 historical novels in his entire repertoire. One of them, Barnaby Rudge, is about, I believe, a set of either like agricultural or industrial labor riots that happened at some point in like England's past. And the second, much more well-known piece of historical fiction, the one that I personally will be reading to fulfill this prompt, is A Tale of Two Cities. A Tale of Two Cities is about London and Paris, specifically during the French Revolution, which at this point had happened roughly 100 years before Dickens wrote this novel. So it definitely is a piece of historical fiction. It has one of the most famous opening lines in history, and a lot of people consider this book to be like Dickens's masterpiece. This is the book that a lot of people, like, if they're gonna read a piece of Charles Dickens in high school, this is usually the thing that their like English teacher forces them to read. So yeah, Tale of Two Cities is what I will be reading to fulfill the Dickens aspect of prompt number 4. For Tolstoy, also, you have basically 2 different options. One of them is the novella Hadji Murat, which I feel like I've mentioned like 80 different times now. Hadji Murat is a lesser known work. It is a character's name. It is a critique of war, and it also is a piece of historical fiction. So literally, if you want, you can just read Hadji Murat and fulfill 4 out of the 5 Tolstoy prompts. I will not be doing that. I will be the unhinged lady reading Tolstoy's other piece of historical fiction, the one, the only, War and Peace. This is the Vintage Classics Russian series edition of War and Peace. It was translated by Larissa Volonkhonsky and Richard Pevear, just like a bunch of the other editions of Tolstoy's novels that I own. Pevear and Volonkhonsky do not translate the French in the text, they translated it in footnotes. If that's gonna bother you, if you want everything translated into English, pick another translation, like maybe one by David Briggs or Anthony Briggs. His last name is Briggs, I can't remember what his first name is. Most of the Penguin editions of War and Peace are translated by Anthony Briggs. I do speak French, and like I said, I like the way Pevear and Volonkhonsky write a fair amount. So I was like, let's just go with this one. If I don't understand what a sentence means, I don't mind like flipping back to a footnote to figure out what the hell is going on. So that is the book that I will be using to fulfill the Tolstoy historical novel prompt. So the 5th and final prompt for my version of the Dickens versus Tolstoy challenge is to read Dickens and Tolstoy's last completed novel. So this is the narrowest of all the challenges. If you choose to partake, we will all be reading the same exact book, because I kind of want to see, like, having at this point already read a bunch of their other works, like, what were their final forms? You know, my hope would be that these last 2 completed novels would be Dickens and Tolstoy in their prime, bringing all their years of experience to bear for like one final complete story. So that's kind of why I really wanted to put this prompt into the challenge. And that's also why I don't want to read like partial incomplete manuscripts. I kind of want to read like whatever their last completed work was. In Dickens's case, that would be Our Mutual Friend. I actually don't know very much about Our Mutual Friend at all, except for the fact that Katie from Books and Things, I think, said that this is her favorite of all of Dickens's novels. So that's a very high bar. I hope that it clears it. And similarly, I hope that Tolstoy also gives us an excellent story with his last completed novel, Resurrection. The edition of Resurrection that I have is by the Oxford World Classics. This is an older translation of the novel, done by Louise Maud. I believe the version that she was working on was a slightly censored version of his manuscript. So what's happened is that the people at Oxford World Classics have hired another academic to go through and edit and revise Louise Maud's translation to put back in the sort of censored passages. And so this is almost sort of like a revised and edited version of Louise Maud's translation. I also have no idea what the hell Resurrection is about. According to the back, it tells the story of a nobleman's attempt to redeem the suffering his youthful philandering inflicted on a peasant girl who ends up a prisoner in Siberia. That sounds insane. But yeah, these two books, Our Mutual Friend and Resurrection, will be the last books that I read for the Dickens versus Tolstoy challenge. After these two, I will consider myself done. So that was a much longer than I anticipated video talking about this challenge that I've set for myself. If you would like to join me, please do feel free. Like I said, you don't have to read 10 books, you don't have to be unhinged like me, but I would just be really excited to find a community of people who are even sort of like vaguely interested in this. And even if you don't want to join me and you just kind of like want to see me suffer through all of this madness, I would greatly appreciate that as well. As always, thank you so much for watching and tolerating my ramblings. I hope you have an amazing upcoming week. And even if your upcoming week is less than perfect, I hope that you're still able to create some truly beautiful moments. Thanks for watching. Bye.